The Brothers Grimm, Faithful John. There was once upon a time an old king who was ill, and thought to himself, I am lying on what must be my deathbed. Then said he, Tell Faithful John to come to me. Faithful John was his favorite servant, and was so called because he had for his whole life been so true to him. Therefore, when he came to the bed, the king said to him, Most faithful John, I feel my end approaching, and have no anxiety except about my son. He is still of tender age, and cannot always know how to guide himself. If you do not promise me to teach him everything that he ought to know, and to be his foster father, I cannot close my eyes in peace. Then answered faithful John, I will not forsake him. I will serve him with fidelity, even if it should cost me my life. At this the old king said, Now I die in comfort and peace. Then he added, After my death you shall show him the whole castle, all the chambers, halls, vaults, and treasures which lie therein. But the last chamber in the long gallery, in which is the picture of the princess of the golden dwelling, you shall not show. If he sees that picture, he will fall violently in love with her, and drop down in a swoon, and go through great danger for her sake. Therefore you must preserve him from that. And when faithful John has once again given him his promise to the king said no more, but laid his head on the pillow and died. When the old king had been carried to his grave, faithful John told the young king all that he had promised his father on his deathbed, and said, This I will assuredly perform, and will be faithful to you, as I have been faithful to him, even if it should cost me my life. When the mourning was over, faithful John said to him, It is now time that you should come see your inheritance. I shall show you your father's palace. Then he took him about everywhere up and down, and let him see all the riches and the magnificent apartments. Only there was one room which he did not open, that in which hung the dangerous picture. The picture was, however, so placed that when the door was open and looked straight in on it, and it was so admirably painted and seemed to breathe and live, and there was nothing more charming or more beautiful in the whole world. The young king, however, plainly remarked that faithful John always walked past this one door and said, Why do you never open this one for me? There is something within, he replied, which would terrify you. But the king answered, I have seen all the palace, and I will know what is in that room also. He then went and tried to break open the door by force. Faithful John held him back and said, I promised your father before his death that you should not see that which is in the chamber. It might bring the greatest misfortune on you and on me. Ah, no, replied the young king. If I do not go in, it will be my certain destruction. I should have no rest day or night until I have seen it with my own eyes. I shall not leave the place now until you have unlocked the door. Then faithful John saw that there was no help for it now, and with a heavy heart and many sighs, sought out the key from the great bunch before him, and he could hide the portrait so that the king should not see it in front of him, but no avail. The king stood on tiptoe and saw it over his shoulder, and then when he saw the portrait of the maiden, which was so magnificent and shone with gold and precious stones, he fell fainting to the ground. Faithful John took him up and carried him to his bed. Sorrowfully thought, The misfortune had befallen us. Lord God, what will be avenged it? Then he strengthened him with wine until he came to himself again. The first words the king said were, Ah, beautiful portrait! Who is it? The princess of the golden dwelling, answered faithful John. The king continued, My love for her is so great that if all the leaves on the trees were tongues, they could not declare it. I will give my life to win her. You are my most faithful, John. You must help me. The faithful servant considered within himself for a long time how to set about the matter, for it was difficult to even obtain a sight of the king's daughter. At length he thought of a way and said to the king, "Everything which she has about her of gold, tables, chairs, dishes, glasses, bowls, and household furniture. Among your treasures are 5 tons of gold. One of the goldsmiths of the kingdom worked these up into all matters of vessels and utensils, into all kinds of birds, wild beasts, strange animals, such as may please her, and we will go there with them to try our luck." The king ordered all the goldsmiths to be brought to him, and they had to work night and day until the last most splendid things were prepared. When everything was stowed on board a ship, faithful John put on the clothing of a merchant, and the king was forced to do the same in order to make himself quite unrecognizable. Then they sailed across the sea, and sailed on until they came to the town where the princess of the golden dwelling resided. Faithful John bade the king stay behind on the ship and wait for him. "Perhaps I shall bring the princess with me," said he. "Therefore see that everything is in order, and the golden vessel set out, and the whole ship decorated." Then he gathered together in his apron all kinds of gold things, went on shore, and walked straight to the royal palace. When he entered the courtyard of the palace, a beautiful girl was standing there by the well, with 2 golden buckets in her hand, drawing water with them. And when she just turned around to carry away the sparkling water, she saw the stranger, and asked who he was. So he answered, "I am a merchant," and opened his apron and let her look in. Then she cried, "Oh, what beautiful gold things!" and put her pails down and looked at the golden wares one after another. Then said the girl, "The princess must see these. She has such great pleasure in gold things. She will buy all you have." She took him by the hand and led him upstairs, for she was the waiting maid. When the king's daughter saw the wares, she was quite delighted, and said, "They are so beautifully worked that I will buy them all from you." But faithful John said, "I am only the servant of a rich merchant. The things I have are not to be compared with those my master has on a ship. They are the most beautiful and valuable things that have ever been made in gold." She waited to have everything brought to her there, but he said, "There are so many of them that it would take a great many days to do that, and so many rooms would be required to exhibit them, that your house is not big enough." Then her curiosity and longing were still more excited, until at last she said, "Take me to the ship. I will go there myself, and behold the treasures of your master." On this, faithful John was quite delighted, and led her to the ship. And when the king saw her, he perceived that her beauty was even greater than the picture that has represented it to be, and thought no other than that his heart would burst. Then she got into the ship, and the king led her within. Faithful John, however, remained behind with the pilot, and ordered the ship to be pushed off, saying, "Set all sails till it fly like a bird in the air." Inside, however, the king showed the golden vases, every one of them, the wild beasts and strange animals. Many hours went by while she was seeing everything, and in her delight she did not observe that the ship was sailing away. After she had looked at the last piece, she thanked the merchant and wanted to go home. But when she came to the side of the ship, she saw that it was deep in the sea, far away from land, and hurried onward with all sails set. "Ah!" she cried in alarm, "I am betrayed! I am carried away, and have fallen into the power of a merchant. I would rather die." The king, however, seized her hand and said, "I am not a merchant, I am a king, and of no worse origin of you. And if I have carried you away with subtlety, that had come to pass because of my exceeding great love for you. The first time that I looked upon your portrait, I fell fainting to the ground." When the princess of the golden dwelling heard that, she was comforted, and her heart was inclined unto him, so that she willingly consented to be his wife. It just so happened, however, that they were sailing onward over the deep sea, that faithful John, who was sitting on the forward part of the vessel, making music, saw 3 ravens in the air, which came flying towards them. At this he stopped playing and listened to what they were saying to each other, for he well understood. One cried, "Oh, there he is, carrying home the princess of the golden dwelling." "Yes," said the second one, "but he has not got her yet," said the third. "But he has got her. She is sitting beside him in the ship." Then the first began again and cried, "What good will that do him? When they reach the land a chestnut horse will leap forward to meet him, and the prince will want to mount it, but if he does that it will run away with him, and rise up in the air with him, and he will never see his maiden again." Said the second, "But there is no escape?" "Oh yes, if anyone else gets on it swiftly and takes out the pistol, which must be in its holster, and shoots the horse dead with it, the young king is saved. But who knows that? And whoever does know it and tells it to him will be turned to stone from toe to knee." Then the second said, "I know more than that. Even if the horse is killed, the young king will not still keep his bride. When they go into the castle together, a roughed bridal garment will be laying there in a dish, and looking as if it was woven with gold and silver. It is, however, there is nothing but sulphur and pitch, and if he puts it on, it will burn him to the very bone and marrow." Said the third, "Is there no escape at all?" "Oh yes," replied the second. "If anyone with gloves on seizes the garment and throws it into the fire and burns it, the young king will be saved. But what's the good in that? Whoever knows it and tells it to him, half of his body will become stone from knee to the heart." Then said the third, "I still know more. Even if the bridal garment will be burnt, the young king will still not have his bride. After the wedding, when the dance begins, the young queen is dancing. She will suddenly turn pale and fall down if dead, and if someone does not lift her up and suck 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spit them out again, she will die. But if anyone who knows that were to declare it, he would become stone from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet." When the ravens had spoken of this together, they flew off onwards, and faithful John had well understood everything, but from the time forth he became quiet and sad, for he had concealed what he had heard. His master would suffer, and if he were revealed it to him, he himself must sacrifice his life. At length, however, he said to himself, "I will save my master, even if it brings destruction on myself." When therefore they came to shore, all happened as had been foretold by the ravens. A magnificent chestnut horse sprang forward. "Good," said the king, "he shall carry me to my palace," and was about to mount it when faithful John got before him, jumped on it quickly, drew the pistol out of the holster, and shot the horse. Then the other attendants of the king, who after all were not very fond of faithful John, cried, "How shameful to kill the beautiful animal that was to carry the king to his palace!" But the king said, "Hold your peace, leave him alone. He is my most faithful John. Who knows what good may have come of his actions?" They went into the palace, and the halls stood a dish. Inside lay the bridal garments, looking no otherwise than as if it were made of gold and silver. The young king went towards it and was about to take hold of it, but faithful John pushed him away, seized it with gloves on, and quickly took it to the fire and burned it. The other attendants again began to murmur, and said, "Behold, now he is even burning the king's bridal garment." But the young king said, "Who knows what good he may have done? Leave him alone. He is my most faithful John." And now the wedding was solemnized, the dance begun, and the bride also took part in it. Then faithful John was watchful, and looked into her face, and suddenly she turned pale and fell to the ground, as if she were dead. At this he hastily ran towards her, lifted her up, and bore into a chamber. He then laid her down, knelt, and sucked the 3 drops of blood from her right breast, and spat them out. Immediately she breathed again, and recovered herself. But the young king had seen this, and being very ignorant why faithful John had done it, was angry, and cried, "Throw him into the dungeon." The next morning faithful John was condemned and led to the gallows. And when he stood up high and was about to be executed, he said, "Everyone who has to die is permitted before his end to make one last speech. May I too claim the right?" "Yes," answered the king. "It shall be granted." Then said faithful John, "I am unjustly condemned and have always been true to you." He then related how hearkened to the conversation of the ravens at sea, and how he had been obligated to do all these things in order to save his master. Then the king cried, "O my most faithful John, pardon, pardon, bring him down." But as faithful John spoke the last word, he had fallen down lifeless and became stone. At this the king and queen suffered great anguish, and the king said, "Ah, how ill I have requited great fidelity," and ordered the stone figure to be taken up to the palace in his bedroom beside his bed. And as often as he looked at it and wept, he said, "Ah, if I could bring you to life again, my most faithful John." Some time passed, and the queen bore two twins, two sons, who grew fast and were her delight. Once the queen was at the church, the two children were sitting playing beside their father. The latter, full of grief again, looked at the stone figure, sighed, and said, "Ah, if I could bring you to life again, my most faithful John." Then the stone began to speak and said, "You can bring me to life again if you will sacrifice what is dearest to you." Then cried the king, "I will give everything I have in the world for you." The stone continued, "If you will cut off the heads of your two children with your own hand and sprinkle me with their blood, I shall be restored to life." The king was terrified when he heard that he himself must kill his dearest children. But he thought of faithful John's great fidelity, and how he had died for him, drew his sword, and with his own hand cut off the children's heads, and then he smeared the stone with their blood. Life returned to it, and faithful John stood once more safe and healthy before him. He said to the king, "Your fidelity shall not go unrewarded." He took the heads of the children and put them on again, and rubbed the wounds with their blood, at which they became whole again, and immediately jumped about and went on playing as if nothing happened. Then the king was full of joy. When he saw the queen coming, he hid faithful John and the two children in the great cupboard. When she entered, he said to her, "Have you been praying in the church?" "Yes," she answered, "but I have been constantly thinking of faithful John and what misfortunes have befallen him through us." Then he said, "Dear wife, we could give him life again, but it will cost us our two little sons, whom we must sacrifice." The queen turned pale and her heart full of terror, but she said, "We owe it to him for his great fidelity." Then the king rejoiced that she thought as he had thought, and went to open the cupboard, and brought forth faithful John and the children, and said, "God be praised, he is saved, and he have our little sons also again," and told how everything had occurred, and then they dwelt together in much happiness until their death. The end.